Hello, everyone, and welcome to GAPABA and NAPABA Summer Judicial Series Part 1, Applying to Federal Clerkships. I'm Pratyusha Chenji, and I will be your moderator today. When I'm not moderating this event, I'm also a law clerk in the Western District of Texas, and I'm also communications co-chair for the Georgia Asian Pacific American Bar Association, affectionately GAPABA. If you don't see it already, you should notice that there is a poll function that is live for you right now. Go ahead and answer those questions that tell us about yourself. Are you a 1L, 2L, 3L, etc., practicing attorney? Let us know what federal courts you're interested in clerking for and what topics you're most interested in learning about today. And this is just a chance for us to get to know you and to make sure that we're answering the questions that you want to hear answered. So tell us a little bit about yourself. That poll will be live for a while for you to answer. And I see we're still getting people coming in, but I will say hello again. Welcome. I'm Pratyusha Chenji, and I'll introduce the panelists. But I'm incredibly humbled to be the one to introduce you to our esteemed panelists today. These are folks who have taken incredible paths to this table, and I'm sure that they've conquered many nefarious 21st century beasts in the process, and they've done it all with grace and kindness, and I'm incredibly grateful for their time and for them agreeing to be a resource to all of you here today. So without further ado, our panelists today are Samin Mosavi, who is clerking for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, Nathaniel Lancaster, who is clerking for the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio, Sarah Lee, who's clerking for the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, and we have Ellen Min, who will be clerking for the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Georgia in 2022. Gracie Studdard, who is a career law clerk for the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. And last but not least, Rashmi Bora, who will be clerking for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit in 2022. And if you're just joining us, I'm Pratyusha Chenji, and I'll be your moderator, and I'm clerking for the Western District of Texas. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, panelists, for taking the time and joining us today. I'm super, super excited. Really quick, before we get started, I wanted to talk about why we're all gathered here today. I think that the best time would be to sort of talk about a quote that I read recently. It goes, today, too few students of color, LGBTQ+ students, and students with disabilities are entering law school, and those who are accepted often are not being set up for success as they face various obstacles in school and in obtaining the kinds of legal jobs that have traditionally led to federal judgeships. And one of those jobs that traditionally lead to federal judgeships is clerking for a federal judge. And this quote was in Building a More Inclusive Federal Judiciary, an article published by the Center for American Progress in 2019. So I think all of us on this panel would agree that clerkships weren't really on our radar until someone along our journey kind of took us by the shoulders and shook us and said, hey, you're great. I think you should consider clerking for a federal judge. And if you're like me, that's all it took. Like, I like you. I think I'll clerk. Maybe it took some of you a little bit more convincing, but I do think all of us agree, and that's why we're gathered here today, that if not for that one or two or that village of people who really told us and encouraged us that we should consider this path, we would not have considered it at all. And I think we're also here today because we want to be those people for everyone here in the audience today to be able to say, hey, you're great. We all think that you all should consider clerking. And so we hope to be that resource for all of you today. So thank you again for joining us. And if you're just coming again, I will say again, be sure to answer that poll so we know a little bit more about you and we know what kind of questions you want answered. But without further ado, I think the first thing we should do is go into our speed round, which is going to be a little game that we're going to play about clerkship basics. Basically, if you have no idea what a clerkship is, let us fill you in less than 10 minutes, if that's at all possible. So panelists, you know the rules, but I'll say it again. Panelists have to answer a question that I pose to them in less than 30 seconds or under 2 sentences. So basically I'll ask you a question and I'll say go. And you're gonna answer that question in less than 30 seconds. And when you're done, you're gonna say boom, kind of like a mic drop, okay? Is that, I hope I'm not asking too much of all of you, if that's okay. So I'll give you an example. If you said, all right, Pratyusha Chenji, the lawyerly question of, tell us about yourself. I will say, hi, I'm Pratyusha, and I am clerking for the Western District of Texas. Boom. And then I'm done. And that's how I know you're done. Okay. Are you ready? All right, sounds good. My first question is for Gracie. Gracie, what is a clerkship? Go.
All right, a clerkship is a job where you work directly underneath a judge, usually with other clerks. You assist your judge with research, writing, and drafting orders. You also assist them with hearings and trials. Boom.
That was really good. Guys, she set the bar really, really high. That was really good. Thank you, Gracie. All right, Samin, how long is a clerkship? Go.
A clerkship can range from 1 to 2 years, and you can clerk for a maximum of 4 years total. Boom.
Nice. Okay, this is getting good. All right, Nate, what does a clerk do? Go.
Yeah, Gracie kind of touched on this point, but generally speaking, a clerk conducts legal research for the judge, draft order and opinions, oversee the docket, schedule and attend hearings, and discuss legal strategies with the judge.
Nice. All right, Rashmi, what kind of, oh, did I skip Ellen? Ellen, sorry, when can you clerk? Go.
I think you skipped Sarah, but I will answer my question instead. You can clerk right after you graduate or after a couple years of working. Boom.
Nice. All right, Sarah, now that I've been called out, what materials do you need to apply to a clerkship? Go.
Generally, you need a cover letter, resume, most recent transcript, law school transcript or grade report, writing sample, and letters of recommendation. Boom.
That boom was like very, very convincing. It had like a sense of satisfaction to it. And now, hopefully, I think we've answered all the basics, except for Rashmi, got a longer one. I'm asking her, what kind of courts can you clerk for? Go.
There are a lot of different federal courts you can clerk for. You have your traditional district courts and appellate courts, which you've probably heard of in law school, but there are also a ton of federal specialty courts like the Court of Federal Claims, which handles money claims against the government, the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, which handles patent litigation and a variety of other federal civil matters. You have the Court of International Trade, you have bankruptcy courts, you have tax courts. There are so many courts where you have an option to clerk beyond just your traditional district or circuit court clerkship. And these other courts and clerkships are fantastic experiences, and you're very highly sought after your clerkship.
Boom. Boom. Nice. All right, that concludes the end of our speed round. You guys did great. That's awesome. And that is everything you need to know about clerkships. All right, bye. No, I'm kidding. We have so much more to tell you, but that's just a speed round. That's everything that your career services could have told you or that you could have found elsewhere, but we just wanted to cover it because this is a panel about all things clerkships. And hopefully if you have any follow-up questions about any of the things we've already touched on and we don't touch on it during this program, be sure to drop it in the Q&A box. Throughout the program, you can submit any of the questions that you may have for our live Q&A section at the end, and we'll be sure to devote at least 20 minutes or 30 minutes to really just hammer through all of your questions. So be sure to drop your questions below. And if you've submitted your questions before the program, we'll be sure to cover them as well. But if we don't, just make sure you prompt us below as well. And I'm going to pause here. And for everyone who just joined us, I'll say welcome to Applying to Clerkships, hosted by GAPABA and NAPABA. We're so happy you could join us. I will also bring your attention to a poll that we have running right now. Make sure you answer it so we know who's in the audience and what kind of information they're looking for. And finally, I wanted to make a quick announcement that you probably saw in the name that this is Summer Judicial Series Part 1. And that's because Part 2 will be coming in May in honor of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We are hosting a Summer Judicial Series Part 2. APA judges on the federal bench. And this will be a panel of esteemed federal judges, circuit court judges from across the country who will be joining us and who will be here to talk to students, budding attorneys, practicing attorneys, and clerks about their journey to the bench. They're going to talk about all things that you want to talk about. Again, much like this one, you can submit questions beforehand and you can really ask them anything. And this program will be moderated by our GAPABA board member, Michael C. Wu, and also our GAPABA board member, BJ Pack, who's a partner at Alston & Bird. We are very excited for this event. Make sure it's on your calendar. It'll be on Friday, May 7th, and registration is open now. And we'll drop the registration link in the chat box as well during the program, but hope to see you there. And now can we see the results of the poll to see who's in the audience? Okay, looks like most of our audience members are 2Ls, but we also have attorneys who are practicing or non-practicing, and a lot of 1Ls as well, and a couple of 3Ls. And for the 0Ls who are thinking about law school, who are here, welcome. We're so glad because you're way ahead of the game. You're already doing your research about clerking and things you should be doing to clerk after law school. Panelists, I'll let you look at sort of the other questions to see if there's anything you wanted to particularly talk about. But it looks like most of the students want to talk about how to put together a competitive application and also life as a clerk and researching clerkships and judges. So, and I think a lot of students just want a clerkship and they don't really know which court they want to clerk for. So that's insightful as well for us to talk about. And with that, we'll go on to part 2, where we're going to talk about preparing to apply for a clerkship. I will start off my first question to Gracie. What is the standard way of applying to a clerkship?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the standard way for applying to a clerkship is what those of you who are in law school have probably heard a lot about already, which is OSCAR. So OSCAR is the online system at oscar.uscourts.gov, I believe, where many judges will post their upcoming clerkship openings, and that can happen years in advance. You using that system can filter the kinds of clerkship openings that you're looking at. You can look at just district court, just appellate court, just bankruptcy court, any kind of filter like that. You can look for certain years that people are hiring, and you can also use that system to automatically generate reports that are emailed to you every week about positions that have been filled, new positions that are coming open. So that way you kind of keep yourself abreast of the opportunities that are out there. You also load into that system your application materials, which are going to be your transcript, your letters of recommendation, your resume, your cover letter, which you have the option to customize for each judge or not. I would advise customizing it, and all that good stuff. It's very important when you're on OSCAR to review each judge's individual instructions. Some judges will say only submit applications through OSCAR. Some will request that you mail a paper copy to chambers. Some have certain requirements for applicants on there. For instance, they may only want applicants who have been on law review or something like that. So you just want to make sure that you are following instructions from the very beginning, since that is such a key part of being a good clerk. So I would say that is the typical standard system that you're going to learn about through law school.
Thank you so much, Gracie. I think that's a great overview of sort of the basics of what you need to know. And we'll definitely come back to Gracie as well in a few, because she'll talk about some of the other ways that you could kind of stand out in a list of applicants as well. But Sarah, my question is for you. For a lot of the applicants, like me, I didn't really know what a clerkship was. And you mentioned that you didn't know what a big deal clerking was either until several mentors put it on your radar. And you also had sort of a philosophy that worked for you in law school and in interviewing, and I think in life. So can you share with us?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I think I can honestly say that I'm only here where I am today based off of the strength of my relationships. I'll just start off with talking about my philosophy. I think it's so important to build authentic, genuine relationships that aren't transactional, where you're just not seeking something from somebody based off of who they know or what they can provide you. And I think people can tell the difference between sincerity and disingenuousness. So it's just so important for everyone to be, for y'all attending, to be really courteous and kind to people you encounter, whether it's your law school classmates, professors, coworkers, the custodial staff. I think it's really just remembering that people are people, and that process is, and sort of that mindset and that outlook has really been so helpful for me in so many ways, but especially in, I think, responding and expressing gratitude. which for me led me to build relationships with mentors that where they were really invested in my success. So like Pratyusha mentioned, I actually came into law school sort of like blind, as in I wasn't really quite certain what the quote unquote right thing to do was, but I knew that I was interested in being in the courtroom. And based off of, I created a relationship with one of my law school professors, and she became really invested in my future. And based off of what she knew about me, she had been a former clerk, and she encouraged me to consider clerking. And she said it would be a wonderful opportunity to get sort of like a hands-on experience in litigation. And that is 100% true. And so based off of her advice, I sought opportunities to be in the courtroom. And that led me to my first year experience of being an intern in the US Attorney's Office. And so seeing federal district court up close, and that only solidified, yes, clerking. And so all to say, I will just briefly talk about how I sort of got my clerkship. And it was when I was 2L, I was working as a summer associate at a firm, and I had just built relationships, like I said, and I built relationships with a partner and associate, and I had done some work for them, and they also became really invested in me. And one of the associates just so happened to be the former clerk of my current judge. And based off of what she knew about me and what she knew about the judge, she thought we would be a good fit, and so helped facilitate introductions and the application process. So, you know, all to say, I'm not saying build relationships because it'll get you somewhere, because I really don't think that's true. If anything, I think it's, hey, people will respond to sincerity. And if you're really being genuine, I think a little kindness goes a long way. So yeah.
Well, I think that's great. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your experience also in detail, and also sharing your philosophy with us, because I think these are things that law students don't hear enough. And I think your story really speaks to kind of being kind and thoughtful and gracious and grateful in all steps. So thank you. My next question is for Ellen. You also weren't sure that if you wanted to clerk, if it was right for you. So what tips would you give audience members who are feeling the same way and who are not sure whether or not clerking is for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So like many of us on the panel, and I'm sure many of you on the call, I really didn't know what a clerkship was either until I think maybe halfway through my 1L year when a mentor brought it to my attention too. And so it was one of those things where I initially was really intrigued and curious about, okay, what does a clerkship entail? What does it look like? What will the job actually be? And so I wanted to first kind of get a taste for it and see what it would actually be like before I started applying for a clerkship. And so I pursued an externship actually at the Northern District of Georgia. And it gave me a really, really great opportunity, sort of like what Sarah said, to kind of see the courtroom, see courtroom proceedings, and then also have the unique opportunity to go behind chambers and talk to current clerks, talk to the judge, and get great insight on what a clerkship entails. And so for the 1Ls on the call, I know that sometimes judges will have opportunities for you to intern over the summer. That's a great opportunity to see if you want to pursue a clerkship or not. And then for the 2Ls and 3Ls, pursuing an externship or an internship during your academic year will also give you great insight into what a clerkship will look like.
Oh, that's great insight. Thank you. And especially for touching on the topic of externships and how that could kind of play into you getting a better idea of what's coming next in your role as a clerk. My next question is for Nate. So do you have any advice on extracurriculars, law school classes, anything on your law school trajectory that helped you secure a clerkship?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to caveat it with first by saying there's no direct path to a clerkship. I think, as you probably gather from Sarah and Ellen, that each of us probably took different paths to get to the same destination. And with that said, I mean, we can't focus on it all, right? I mean, for those students who may have the grades, you obviously use your strength, but if personality is your strength, kind of what Sarah spoke to, and building a relationship is your strength, then I think it's important to focus on those. But to answer the question in terms of what extracurriculum activities, I would suggest, I actually think what Ellen just mentioned, traditional externships is key. I think that gives you the closest live experience to what chambers will look like. if you were to become a clerk. And in terms of law school classes, I would actually say clinics. I think clinics is kind of the best of both worlds. It gives you the oral advocacy aspect of being a clerk, and it also gives you the writing portion. In law school, I participated on an appellate clinic, and I was provided the opportunity to do a lot of writing and to work with some of the attorneys on the cases with all arguments. And I think that prepared me the best for my clerkship.
Thanks, Nate. And I think that's, I think like you said, it's very important to stress that this is a unique journey for everyone. And I've talked to all the panelists about their journeys, and there was no one way to do it. And so you'll hear more about everyone. We'll all share kind of our stories throughout the program. But if anyone kind of told you that you had to do X, Y, Z to get from point A to point B, that's not the case. And I hope that we disprove that by the end of this program. But thank you for your insight, Nate. So now I have sort of questions related on the topics of how you research where to apply. So you've gone through the soul searching of whether or not you think clerking is right for you, and you've decided you want to clerk. So what next? Where do you start? Because if any of the audience members are in the position that I was, where I had no idea where to begin my research, this next set of questions is for you. So Rashmi, a question that we received from any attendees was, how do you choose which chambers or judges to apply for? So I remember you told me your approach was sort of based off of what you envisioned for your future practice. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's really important before you apply to clerkships to do some soul searching and figure out what is it that you want out of a clerkship, because I think a lot of times people think of clerkship as like, oh, it's like a one-year job, you're just helping out the judge, but your clerkship is with you for life. And so it's really important to think about sort of what would be a good fit for you. And for me personally, I knew that I wanted to go into patent law, and that's a very specific area of law, and that because of that, not every single clerkship would make sense for that career path. So for example, I didn't apply to any appellate clerkships outside of the federal circuit, because when you appeal a patent case from district court, you appeal to the federal circuit, not to any of the other appellate courts. So if I went to, for example, the Ninth Circuit, there are no patent cases in the Ninth Circuit. And so based on that interest in knowing what I wanted to do after my clerkship, I sort of narrowed down and focused my applications with district courts and the federal circuit, and basically places where there were a lot of patent cases where that would really help my career, and where perhaps my background in patent law could also be helpful to the judge. So definitely, take some time before you apply, think about what you want out of your clerkship, think about what steps you want to take after your clerkship, and kind of use that to guide who you choose to apply to.
No, that's great. And I'm going to segue now to Samin. You also had a very unique way of researching clerkships. So can you talk about that?
Sure. I was lucky enough to summer at a firm that had a great website where you could actually look up where everyone had for people that worked at the firm, like where they'd clerked by circuit and by district. So when I was there during the summer, I thought, this would be a good way to reach out to people. So I just started filtering into the circuits that I wanted to work in, and just started sending emails. And thankfully, the firm I worked at has a great firm culture. So I reached out to a partner in the Chicago office and said, hey, I'm a summer associate in the Atlanta office, and I'm really interested in clerking in the circuit that you clerked in. Would you have some time for a quick call? And he responded very quickly and was like, absolutely. And we just got on a call and chatted. And then also even within the Atlanta office, I talked to multiple people. And if, they didn't clerk in the same circuit that I was looking for, they were like, oh, but I do have a friend from law school that I know that clerked there. So let me put you in touch with that person. And that happened multiple times. And that was really, really helpful just to be able to speak to so many different people. So I highly recommend trying to see if you can do that, because I know it helped me a lot.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Ellen real quick as well, because Ellen, you had an interesting way of hearing about your clerkship and doing research for it as well.
Yeah, so one way, other than if you don't have the great resource that Samin had with the law firm is asking your school, career offices or professors, because a lot of alum from your school have either clerked or are currently clerking, and they're great resources to reach out to, even just to ask them questions about, hey, what was your clerkship like? Or where did you clerk, and get advice that way. And that's just one common ground that you have already with having that same law school experience. So that was how I got advice when I was searching for a judge to apply to. And then when I got my interview, I knew there were Georgia State law grads who had clerked for this judge. And so reached out to them and asked them for interview tips and what I should kind of be aware of. And I think that gave me great insight and great preparation going into my interview too.
No, that's really great insight. And I want to take a moment to dissect for the audience what our panelists are saying. So essentially, when you're doing your research, you know, yes, you walk into this huge bubble and you're not sure where to start, but there are different approaches that you can take based on what your strengths are and what you're comfortable doing. And so Rashmi identified for us that one way to do it is to do some soul searching about what you want in a practice. And so if you want to go into IP law, or if you want to go into for example, patent law, and you might end up on the federal circuit and be researching that sort of niche area of courts. And, you know, and Sarah and Samin, like, feel free to jump in, but I remember both of you identified why you only apply to district court versus appellate court. Sarah, because of her experience in the U.S. Attorney's Office and her interest in criminal law, focused on district court. Not to steal your thunder, Sarah, if you wanted to jump in and tell that story. And Samin had said how she wants to go into securities litigation, so she was focused more on appellate court. And so that would be one way of doing your approach. And the other way would be to focus on the people you know and the people that you find mentors either in your law school or in the firms that you work at or the different workplaces that you intern in, just to see if there's anyone that you feel like you really resonate with, and if they've clerked, maybe they know some people. That's the second option, is to reach out to your network and to your mentors and to ask questions. And then the last way would be what Ellen identified, which would be to focus on your career office and see if there are alums in your school who already have the information and who can talk to you about the various clerkships that are available. But before we do that, there's actually a third path you can take as well. And I'm going to ask Sarah this question, because Sarah, you've focused on the individual you're applying to. So as opposed to the introspection that we've talked about so far, or reaching out to your network, you did your research based off of who you wanted to clerk for. Can you talk about that?
Yes, yeah. Prathusha, you just had mentioned that I was definitely interested. I narrowed my focus to district court based off of all my various interests. And so even within district court, I really felt personally that it was important for me to at least clerk for a female judge. I really thought that there's just so much to learn from a woman who had reached, you know, sort of been in that position. And I think the other panelists had talked about this and highlighted this as well. But you know, your judge is not just your boss, but your judge in many ways is a lifelong mentor. You're forever associated with this person, and so I just thought that just having an experience of being on a team working for a female judge would be a great just opportunity. Researching that was a little bit more challenging because, as I'm sure the panelists can tell you, of course you could go on Google and look up judges, but I don't think, I'm so glad that, you know, judges' personal information is not out there, because, you know, it shouldn't be, but more so, you know, that might not necessarily always give you a sense of a judge's personality. And that's where I think it really goes into relationships again, right? When you build that network and actually meet people who are invested in you, they'll be willing and honest to share with you, oh, I think you'll be a good fit with this person, or, you know, this person's personality in this way is would really match this aspect of yourself. So really it's the people that you know that will provide, at least for me, my personal experience, it was the people that I knew that provided the best insight for me in figuring out, yeah, exactly. It was an individual focus. It was just a little bit more tailored in that respect. Mm-hmm.
Great. So that almost concludes this section, but I just want to highlight again, what's been said so far is that there's 3 ways of doing your research. Is 1, trying to figure out what you want in your future practice. 2, to reach out to your network and see if the people that you like clerked for certain chambers that you feel you might be a good fit for. And then 3, to do what Sarah just talked about, where you focus on who you're applying for and what you want out of that clerkship and what kind of mentorship relationship you want with the judge or the chambers that you want to apply for. And then hopefully that answered your questions. But if you have any more questions about doing your research, we can always come back to this in the Q&A section at the end. Just make sure to drop your question in the live Q&A box below. But I will ask my last question to Gracie. Gracie, in the beginning, you told us about the orthodox way of applying to clerkships, generally through Oscar and putting in emailing or submitting your application. Now, can you tell us about some ways of applying to clerkships that students don't really know about?
Absolutely. So I think it's more common than a lot of people realize that clerkship opportunities are achieved, and you learn about them through non-traditional means, not on Oscar. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. For me, I learned a lot, like Ellen touched on, through my law school career office. Also, most law schools have some kind of clerkship committee that involves different deans, administrators, people from the career office, and faculty members. So that relationship building in your network becomes really key there again, because if you are close to any of those members on the committee, you can reach out to them, and you should be networking with them anyway to ask them what information they're getting from judges or from other sources about opportunities that are coming available, or about a particular judge's hiring preferences. They may have a connection to your law school, for instance. They may have certain preferences that line up with your strengths. For instance, some judges prefer clerks with prior work experience. And so those things are both really good. Outside of your law school, I really, really, really encourage law students to always get out there. Obviously, this has been a strange year during the pandemic, but you're here at a panel right now. This is a good step. Go to professional organizations, happy hours, events, whatever it is, and just meet people, start talking to people. If you are putting yourself out there, you're being your full authentic self. People are going to be willing to help you a lot more than you think. There's not a reason to be shy or bashful. People want to help law students when they're in this profession. Building those mentors through things like clinics is really important. Also, remember that your classmates are going to be crucial to your network. One of my former classmates who was in a legal clinic, like Nate touched on, and she ended up being a clerk for the judge that I now work for. And it was when she was leaving chambers that I learned about the opportunity that was coming up with the clerkship that was happening. And that we had built this trust between us working on cases together. So I knew that it was going to be a good fit. Also, your coworkers, if you are someone who's currently in practice, I see that we have some non-traditional students on here right now. Your colleagues may have been clerks in the past. I was lucky to also have the kind of system where I could look up coworkers by what kinds of clerkships they had done and where. And I immediately started just talking to anyone who would make time for me. And I happened to have a colleague who also clerked for the judge that I currently work for. And so that was a really helpful conversation. But yeah, those mentors and people that are sort of back channels of information that are not formally advertising things on Oscar will not only give you information you may not have otherwise had, but they can help you figure out how to tell your story. And those connections are not contingent on your grades either. So I see some people here are asking questions about what if I don't have the top grades in the class? Keep building your experience and talk to people about how to tell your story effectively through those sorts of channels. So, yep. And I think that ultimately the traditional, these sorts of traditional versus non-traditional methods, the non-traditional can end up being much more valuable and leading to a lot more opportunities than just looking good on paper alone and shooting things out at random on Oscar. So
that is excellent, and I think it really brings together all the themes that you all have touched on in this entire section, which is just how important it is to build relationships. Because Gracie, I'm going to ask you again as a follow-up, but it sounds like it's never too early to start thinking about clerkships. Is it ever too early?
no, I don't think so. I think that if someone is even, not in law school yet, maybe you're in college, you might have an opportunity to intern for a judge or somehow just get some experience in court. in a clerk's office or something like that. Just getting any sort of concept for how a court works and building a relationship that will matter down the road, maybe. Not that that's why you do it, but you never know what is going to be valuable. So getting close in any way that you can, it's never too early.
And I'll stress also that it sounds like you're saying it's never too late to ever start thinking about a clerkship either.
And it's never too late. I don't believe so. Obviously, there are different hiring preferences among different judges, but I'm someone who came out of practice into clerking. So I did it kind of the opposite of the way some people do, but never too late in my view.
Perfect. Well, that concludes our brainstorming for clerking section. Thank you all for your incredible insight and we're only in like 1/3 of the way done with this program, so thank you. Now we're going to move on to our second section, which is the actual applying and interviewing, because we're already receiving a lot of questions from the audience members about how do I build a good application packet, what is compelling, what makes me stick out in a pile of resumes, etc. So I'm going to start off this section with Ellen, who is actually our most recent candidate who applied during a pandemic as a 3L in law school and secured a clerkship. So congratulations to you, Ellen. And I wanted to ask what the process was like for you, because you don't need to like rewind and think like for like a long time ago. It just happened. So.
Yeah, of course. So I think all of the advice that was actually given earlier when we were discussing the relationships, I just want to like re-emphasize that, because I think it's due to those relationships that I was able to kind of persevere and continue applying during a pandemic. So my law school has actually been online as well. And so it was a struggle navigating that on top of kind of having the motivation to continue applying. So I actually started applying my 2L year in the spring. And then when the pandemic hit and all the courthouses kind of shut down, it was a big pause on my application cycle. And I decided, oh no, do I just submit it, send it out and hope that the judges are still in their chambers? Or should I just take a pause and then also take that moment to kind of have that self-reflection and do some soul searching like Rashmi was talking about earlier? And so I spent that year kind of deciding, okay, like, do I really want to do this clerkship? Is this something that I want for myself, or is this because others wanted it for me? But I think after having spoken to a lot of mentors and also during my summer associate program, I talked to a lot of attorneys who encouraged me to keep applying, that I decided to go forward with it. So I used all of the routes when I was applying. I used Oscar, I used my network, and I also used the opportunities that were kind of emailed out to us through the deans and professors of my law school, and I landed my clerkship using that third option. It was sort of one of those things where I thought, oh, what are the chances? I'm sure the judge is getting a lot of applications right now, but let me just give it a try. I'll put my application together and I'll send it away. And I ended up getting that interview and getting my clerkship. And so I think for the 3Ls who are on this call too, law schools, I think during law school, you kind of have this idea that you have to apply for a clerkship year 2L year to get one for right after graduation. And that is not the case. I think for me, had I not spoken to all my mentors and the professors, I would have stopped applying, but I continued applying during a pandemic, during my 3L year, and I was able to succeed. And so definitely for the 3Ls on the call, for attorneys who are on this call, it's never too late. And I'm sure you're going to hear that over and over again on this call. I think as long as you want this, and I think as long as you are willing to put in a little bit of the work, you're able to get this clerkship. And so I just want to say it was stressful, but it's definitely manageable, especially given all of the help that I got from my network and my mentors.
That's great. And it actually prompts me to ask all of the panelists, maybe you can kind of disclose when you started applying for clerkships. So I'll start, I didn't start applying to clerkships until after graduation, or actually right before graduation, the end of my last semester of 3L year. I'll pass it off to Rashmi. When did you?
Yeah, same for me actually. I graduated in 2020 and I started applying kind of right before graduation and sent out most of my applications after graduation. So I was interviewing over the summer of 2020, which was also when I was studying for the bar exam, which was kind of hard. But definitely I want to echo that it's never too late to start applying for clerkships. You don't have to, apply like, year one out year or anything. There's no, there's no right time to apply, just, whenever you're ready.
Sarah, you told me that you said you applied late as well, whatever the time limit is, late.
Yes, I was going to say, I think there is a perception that in order to be on time, you have to apply sometime after 1L or in your 2L. But I did it my 2L summer, so into my 3, like right before my 3L. And so, yeah, that just echoing, whatever time is right for you is the right time.
And Gracie, you already told us, but you didn't apply until after you'd practiced.
That's right. I was about a year into practicing, and at the firm that I came from, which was a big law firm, it was very common, and it is very common for people to do 1 to 3 years, go clerk, come back, maybe do another set of years, and then go do another different clerkship, maybe at a different kind of court, and come back. So it's kind of an iterative process that people do while they're practicing.
And Samin?
I did the same thing as Sarah. I applied during 2L summer, like very close to when I started my 3L year. And I wanted a clerkship right after I graduated. So I will say that that's something to pay attention to when you're trying to apply. You can apply whenever, but if you want one that's very imminent, you should probably apply a little bit sooner. And also keep in mind that some judges now are hiring 2 or 3 years out. So you kind of want to keep tabs on that to make sure that you don't miss the boat there.
And Nate?
Yeah, I also applied during my 2L summer, and I actually didn't start until my second year. So right after graduating, I practiced at a firm for a year and then went to do my clerkship. Similar to what Sam said, a lot of judges are now looking to hire clerks who have a little bit more legal experience. And while at that time I was more so committed to doing a clerkship immediately after graduation, I think having practiced for a year did me some good. I think you go in, you get to hit the ground running, you get to kind of know some of the little things that it'll be necessary to know prior to starting, versus some of the folks who go a little bit immediately after law school. They probably have to learn the nuts and bolts that you already learned already. So I applied my second year summer, and I didn't start until after my first year of practice.
I think that brings up a good point, Nate, is sometimes that summer between your 2L and 3L year where you're actually working in a space where you're getting kind of a real life perspective of what life after graduation looks like. Maybe that's the time that you want to take a step to clerk because you're not ready to step into practice just yet, or you feel like you have some more skills that you need to get under your belt, or see a few more matters before you walk into a firm space or like a professional working space. So that's not quite what you said, but that just made me think of that as well. Okay, great. So thank you all for that. And I think it should dispel whatever you've heard about what a timeline is to the audience members. There is no right time. And if anyone kind of tells you that there is, you can point fingers our way because there's 7 of us here that could tell you that's not the case. But going back to the actual, application packet, Gracie, what are some tips that you would give an applicant when deciding, what chambers to apply to?
Yeah, I think it could be really difficult to get that kind of information if you're not using the back channels and inroads that we've all been talking about, using your mentors and your network, because like Sarah said, you can Google judges online if you want, but that's not really going to give you a sense of what it's like to work with someone closely every day. And working in a chambers is very, it's very tight. It's like a family in a lot of ways. You have a select number of colleagues, and your judge is like a lifelong mentor to you. So it's important that you're compatible for that kind of working relationship. And that is something that the people who know you best can help you figure out if they have connections that are helpful. Like some other people have talked about putting yourself out there and saying, I'm interested in clerking in this district or for this judge. Do you know anyone who has worked for them or has worked in this district, and can you connect me to them? If you are doing that in a way that is polite and respectful and professional, people are usually not going to turn you down. If they can help you out, they want to help you out. And that was a way that I got a lot of information when I was searching for a clerkship. I had a connection through a professional organization that I was part of and through a volunteer organization that I was part of, who were able to introduce me to former clerks. Former clerks can be a great source of information, and they can be particularly helpful in giving you information if you're interested in a certain judge. Current clerks may be limited in the amount of advice that they can give you or insight that they can give you just based on the judge's preferences for how information is shared. But also they have to keep in mind that if you apply, they might be interviewing you. So they have to kind of preserve the integrity of that process. But another way to get information that's helpful, I think, is the internship or externship opportunities. Internship opportunities are usually what people talk about that happens during the summer, a lot of times after your 1L summer. But externing is something that you do, it's the same job, but you can do it during the school year, or if your law school offers summer credit, you can do it during the summer term, and you can get anywhere from, 1 class's worth of credit to 2 classes worth, depending on your school's requirements. And then you're in the courthouse, you're meeting other people's clerks, you're observing judges and hopefully meeting them, and just getting your face in front of people so that they recognize your name if your application comes across. They'll be more willing to talk to you. They, will think of you if they have a helpful connection. And it'll also help you learn about points of compatibility that you may have with one chambers or another, one judge or another, that you can then highlight in hopefully the conversation that you're having with them during an interview. So.
And one of the reasons I should highlight for the audience is that I asked Gracie this question is because everything that she just told you are the research you should be doing to include in a cover letter, if at all possible. These are the sort of things that will make you potentially in a stack of applicants stick out a little bit more, is that sort of genuine connection of, you knowing someone who has a connection to chambers, who they can go back and verify, and learn more about you, more so than what you can write in a cover letter. But I should also say that, I know that I heard this advice a lot during law school, but I personally, as a first generation student, didn't have any connections, particularly, for example, me clerking in the Western District of Texas right now. And all of my connections were, if I had any connections, would have been in Georgia. So I actually did only submit a cold letter based off of extensive research that I had done about a chambers and me genuinely knowing that I wanted to clerk for this particular judge and making it clear in a cover letter. So I say that just to say there's a lot of ways to do research if you had the resources available to you in all of the ways that Gracie just talked about and we talked about in the previous section. But if not, it's okay to just put a cold letter, cover letter in, but make sure that you do as much work as you can to make a connection with a complete stranger, because that makes the ultimate difference. And on that note, now that we've talked a little bit about the cover letter, I wanted to go back up to the general application packet. So Sarah, what is a helpful tip that you think every candidate should know about the basic application materials?
Yes, I've seen, based off our poll, it seems like there's a lot of people who are wondering how you can submit a competitive application. And I'll definitely say a big part of that is your resume. That's definitely when we're reviewing applicants. That's definitely one of the first things that we look towards too. And here's the thing, y'all, don't put anything on your resume that you can't back up. I think so many people will be surprised by, if we do follow up with someone has listed this employer, and we'll reach out to this employer and be like, hey, how is this person's, work ethic? They might have just middling feedback, which is not what you want, y'all. You want great feedback. You want people that can stand by you and let us know what kind of individual you are. So if you're putting anything on your resume, I think one thing you really have to think about, are you proud of what you're putting on there? And can you back that up? And that feedback loop is so important, not only with yourself, but with others. Maybe you should look past at your previous working experience and think about, oh, how did I present in this workspace and what would they say about me? And if you think it's, just not going to be positive, I think you're going to have to be prepared to answer that kind of question if if that comes up within the interview process. But here's the thing, y'all, it's never too late to really work hard at the things that you've listed on at your resume, or to start working hard now and to know that anything that you've placed on that sheet is something that you could really stand by. So yeah, your resume is such an important part of that. And so yes, I think that's just one tip. I don't want to, ramble on, but a really big one to look and make sure that you feel secure about that stuff there.
No, definitely. That's great insight about a resume, because we have so many things on our resume sometimes from like ages ago, particularly as a law student, and we need to make sure that we're consistently updating it. And here's something else is, as I want to stress what Sarah said, is if you have something on your resume, make sure that you're okay with, the legal world is a small community and they can very easily pick up the phone and make a call. So make sure everything on your resume is something that could lead to a reference, even if you didn't provide a list of references and that person is not on a reference. It's very easy to Google someone or a potential position and find the person who's supervising you as an intern and make that call. So thank you, Sarah. And now I'm going to ask Rashmi, expanding on the application packet. We talked about the cover letter, we talked about the resume. What tips or tricks did you discover when you were submitting materials that you thought were, really important and you didn't realize that as an applicant?
Yeah, so another really important component of your application are your letters of recommendation. Most judges will ask for anywhere between 2 and 4 letters. But for a lot of professors especially, not only are they willing to write you a letter, but they can actually email or call the judge on your behalf. And that can give you a huge boost with your application. So like for me personally, when I was applying to clerkships at the federal circuit, I reached out to my patent law professor and I asked kind of if they had any recommendations for strengthening my application, and my professor just offered to call a number of judges that I was interested in clerking for, and I did not realize that that was a thing. But as I started talking to more people, I realized that it's very common for professors to actually reach out to judges and kind of flag your application. And in my case, when I was applying for the federal circuit, my application was like reasonably competitive, but I didn't have a ton of patent experience yet, so I definitely wasn't top of the pack. And that phone call from my professor really made a big difference in even getting my application noticed. And so as far as how do you get to that point where a professor will make a call for you, I think this goes back to Sarah's comments about building relationships, because in order for someone to feel comfortable recommending you in that personal capacity, they have to really get to know you and feel comfortable vouching for you. And so I really encourage students, especially if you're still in school, get to know your professors, and don't just do the whole transactional thing, but really genuinely get to know people, so that when you are ready to apply to clerkships, then professors can say more than just oh, they got an A in my class or whatnot. And for people on the call who maybe aren't in law school anymore, you can still do this and build relationships with people that you work with. So for example, I'm currently working at a law firm. My law firm has an internal clerkship committee where if you are already practicing and want to clerk, they can connect you with partners or associates who have clerked for judges you're interested in, and that can sort of help you kind of get your application noticed. So never too late to build those relationships, and definitely don't overlook how strong those connections can be in your application, because many judges are getting hundreds, maybe even thousands of applications, and anything that you can do to get your application noticed is really helpful.
And on that point, if you're a 3L or someone who's graduated or someone who knows that you don't have the closest relationships with your professor, because let's be honest, a lot of law school classes are very large and it's really hard to have one-on-one relationship with your professors. Pro tip would be to use our flyer for this event and shoot them an email. And I'm not even joking, just say, hey, I attended this event. Like, this is not a plug at all. I genuinely think you should just say, hey, I attended this event and suddenly I'm thinking about clerkships, but I've never had the chance to talk to you about it while I was in law school or while I was in your class. I'm curious if we could set up a coffee, etc. Or even unrelated to this event, maybe you can say, I never really got to know you and I would love to set up a coffee with you, which would be more to the, genuine relationships, I guess, without having like something in mind. But it's okay to be direct, to say that I don't know you, but I want to. Yeah, so on that note, I had a question, sort of moving away from the application packet, but for Samin, you had to navigate an extra step in your application process. And so can you tell us about that?
Sure. So fun fact, I'm a dual Swedish and Iranian citizen. But not so fun fact, if you're not a US citizen, you can't get paid for a federal clerkship because of an appropriations bill that, I don't know, has been there for decades, that basically says any money that's given to the federal judiciary can only be given to US citizens. The rule does not apply if you clerk in Hawaii or Alaska, so maybe target going there. But that was a little too out there for me. And also Hawaii, I'm sure, is very competitive because it's Hawaii. But so for my process, I kind of had to be, I think, a little bit more proactive about thinking about the judges that I was going to apply for, and using my network and trying to talk to people and be like, do you think this judge would be okay with, you know, probably having to do a couple of extra steps for me, because I wouldn't just be a normal clerk. They'd have to fill out some extra paperwork that basically says that I can't get paid, but I'm going to be clerking and yada, yada, yada. So that was definitely an extra step. Some things that I did, instead of just talking to people that I did know, for some judges, I just didn't know anybody. So I would call chambers and have to ask what their policy was. And I got a lot of, as soon as I said, but I would be volunteering because, and then people would just stop and be like, judge wouldn't be interested. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And I think a lot of that is maybe a misconception about, oh, if someone's willing to volunteer their time and not be paid, it's probably because they couldn't get a clerkship otherwise. And maybe they're deficient in some ways. And that's the only reason why they would want to clerk for free. And so that kind of was a struggle for me. But yeah, you can clerk if you are an international student. You just need to find a judge that would be willing to kind of do the extra steps for you. And I actually thought that I wouldn't be able to clerk because a federal judge that I talked to told me that I wouldn't pass the security clearance, so that I wouldn't be able to clerk. And so for a minute there, I just thought that, okay, dream squashed, won't happen for me because of this reason. And thankfully he was wrong, because I passed the security clearance and I'm working in a different circuit. So that's another obstacle, is sometimes people just, it's such a rare circumstance that sometimes people are misinformed or just don't have any information about it. And the easier answer is just, for them, is just, no, we're not going to deal with that. We don't know. So my advice to you is not to give up, because you definitely can, but your bank account will definitely take a hit.
No, thank you for that incredible insight, because those were questions that we received from attendees as well, is what are these limitations? And it sounds like you have to kind of chart your own path and be resilient about it, and to kind of manifest your own road to clerking. So thank you for that incredible feedback. And if you have any more questions about this experience or any other of the experiences shared in this section, drop them in the Q&A, because it's almost our live Q&A time. But my final question is for Nate. Nate, we've talked a lot about building relationships, and I know this is like your jam. You're like, are so good at building relationships. Nate's the kind of person who like call me up just to ask me if I'm okay, which there are not enough humans like that in life. And so this question to end this incredible section is for you. What role does networking during law school, after law school, just networking in general, play in securing a post-clerkship job? Because clerkship is a job, but then there's a job after that as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think at this point, every panelist probably touched on this, but I think networking is huge. As a first generation attorney, at least for me, guidance was key. So I pride myself on making connections with individuals that share similar backgrounds like me, or may look like me, whatever substantive connection I can make to be able to guide me throughout my legal career. I would say, in a nutshell, it's better to know people before needing them. So get out there, network. Networking is also good for inspiration. Oftentimes applying to clerkships can be really tiring and discouraging. At least it was for me. I mean, it was just constant rejection at some point, or constant silence because you don't hear back. But when you network with people and you realize that they've been through this process or they're going through it, I think it provides that inspiration to keep going.
And I wanted to ask you all a question that I think is relevant. I want to touch on before we leave this section. You all talked about building relationships with different either professors or people in your network, in your law school class, etc. How do you approach speaking with former clerks? Because we talked about how current clerks are kind of off, off, I don't know what I'm looking for, but essentially you can't off limits. You can't talk to them per se, but former clerks are okay to talk to. How do you approach, making that connection with a former clerk, either in an informational way or beyond sort of informational? And how much leverage do former clerks have in sort of calling up chambers and, saying, hey, I like this candidate, you should take a look?
Well, I guess I'll take the first stab at it. I would say it depends. I think some it's the nature of people. Some are willing to do more than others. So I think reaching out to a former clerk is helpful to the extent that you could get insight into chambers. And I think it's a good thing to do, because I think most clerks, because they've been in our shoes, they'll probably pick up the phone and take a call. Now, to the extent that they'll want to reach out to chambers, that's based on the individual. But I've heard stories where they've connected with that individual that called, and they really think they'll be a great fit, and they picked up the phone and called a Gracie, who's a career clerk, or called the judge and made that recommendation. So you really never know, and it's always worth your while, nonetheless.
I agree with Nate that it's definitely always worth your while. Never be afraid to ask. So long as you're doing it in a way that is, like I said before, polite, professional, respectful. A lot of times I just found out who were the people I needed to talk to by asking my career office at my law school, or if I had a name already. Sometimes I would just look up former clerks on LinkedIn and just shoot them a message and say, hi, I'm interested in applying to so-and-so. If you would be willing to talk to me for 15, 20 minutes, I would really appreciate it. I would love to learn some more about chambers, and, highlight whatever we had in common, whether it was the law school or a connection, which LinkedIn will helpfully tell you if you have people in common. Maybe those people you have in common can make that introduction. That also was a way that I just maybe had a friend who was a former clerk, and just asking for a little bit of time, being respectful of those people's time. Most people will take a call and they'll talk to you. Like Nate said, how far they go after that really depends on the person, and also their relationship with chambers, but yeah, it's definitely worth a shot.
Awesome. So we have a few minutes before we start our Q&A, but I would love to start our Q&A early, since we have so many great questions coming in. So kind of final tips from the panelists. I'll just open floor it on the topic of resilience, this being a difficult process. How do you handle rejection? Any tips you have for the candidates? I'll start with Sarah, and then Rashmi, and then Nate. Let's go.
Yeah, yes. I think it's important to be intentional but open-minded. And that might seem like those ideas conflict, but what I mean by intentional is I think all these wonderful panelists have highlighted different ways that you can be intentional, right? Do you want to think of a clerkship that's specifically tailored to your interests within the legal field? Or are you thinking about a clerkship maybe specifically geographically, if you have a geographic preference or time preference, right? And basically figure out what are your non-negotiables, right? Like maybe you have family obligations and you can only clerk within a certain window, then that's something that you really need to think about intentionally. Okay, how do I plan for that? But being open-minded is, once you've gotten your non-negotiables, then let's say that you're open to maybe geographically, right? If you've got sort of the leverage and freedom to go somewhere for a year or two, then that's definitely something, worth considering about being open-minded and pursuing different opportunities that you'd maybe necessarily wouldn't have, brought up for yourself Also, I think even the fact that y'all are on here and thinking about clerking, that is just demonstrating open-mindedness. And so I just want to applaud you for that. But yeah, I think being very tailored and very intentional would be helpful. And yes, so I'll actually hand it over to Nate so he can speak more into some final tips.
Yeah, in terms of best ways to handle rejection, I'll say if I keep going, moving forward. I think all of us on this as panelists probably have that in common. Prior to us getting here, we was all rejected at least once, or probably at least 10 times. It's a part of the game. Make peace with it and move on. Don't allow it to be a discourager. And I would also say don't allow it to lead you to think that there's something wrong with you. I mean, applicants get rejected for numerous reasons, and often time judges get, a bunch of great candidates. So I would say accept rejection with your head high and keep going.
And Rashmi, what is a final point that you'd want to hammer home?
Yeah, just echoing what Nate said is stick with the process. Applying for clerkships is really hard, and it's very different than applying for a law firm job where they're maybe hiring 40, 50, 60 summer associates, because with clerkships, judges are only hiring maybe 2 to 4 clerks. And rejection is very common, especially now with the pandemic. Since judges can interview virtually, there are, judges are typically interviewing more candidates than usual, which can make it even more competitive. So one anecdote that I tell a lot of people who are applying for clerkships is, yes, I'm clerking, but before that, I was rejected post-interview by 8 different judges. And it was a bad feeling. And this is kind of another area where, it's important to rely on people to support you. So after my 8th rejection, I was, not in a great place. I emailed one of my recommenders and I asked her, I'm like, hey, this happened. Can we talk? And can I figure out what I can do to sort of, make number 9 happen? And I had an hour and a half long phone call with my professor, and she gave me a ton of pointers on sort of how to reframe my answers, and also just gave me a much needed confidence boost. And she also connected me to another federal judge who was willing to do a mock interview with me the night before my federal circuit interview. And so that was really helpful and sort of helped me reframe my approach to interviewing generally. And I, the next day got my clerkship. And so I think a lot of times in law school, especially, people tell you, oh, you might just have, 1 or 2 interviews and then one of those will work out. And that's not always the case. And if you end up in a situation like me, where you're just getting rejected constantly, there's nothing wrong with you. It's okay. And don't be afraid to ask for help, because we've all been there. We know how hard the process is. And if you're just willing to ask, you'll be very surprised at how many people will really bend over backwards to give you help and to sort of boost you up when you need it. So no matter where you are in the clerkship process, don't give up, stick with it, and everything will work out in the end.
Thank you so much. And finally, I wanted to end it off with a story before our Q&A, and this one is for Ellen. Ellen, you almost didn't apply to your clerkship. Can you tell us about that and why?
Yeah, so I think as I was applying for a clerkship, many of my classmates were also applying for clerkships as well. And I found myself comparing kind of their skill sets to mine, what they had on their resume versus mine. And it was a pretty bad cycle that I was falling into, where I would see other people who were applying and think, oh, there's no way that I could get a clerkship if these people from my class are applying. And that's absolutely not true. I think each individual has a unique story, a unique path, a unique background that you can highlight in your resume, in your cover letter, and even in the interview. So biggest piece of advice that I can give is don't compare yourself to other people who are applying for clerkships. There are a lot of talented law students out there, and everyone on this panel is so impressive, but all of us took different paths to get to where we're at, and none of us have the same 2 things on our resume. And so don't get into a habit of thinking that you can't get a clerkship because only those on law review in your school are getting a clerkship, or only those who are on the editorial board are getting a clerkship. I think as long as you focus on what makes you unique and what skill sets you have, that's what's going to make you stand out most in your application.
Thank you so much. And that ends our sort of just 3 sections about applying, brainstorming, and interviewing for clerkship. So thank you all the panelists. If I missed something, or if there's something else we need to cover, definitely prompt me. No formalities, but if not, I'd love to jump straight into our live Q&A, because we have 17 questions right now that are live, and 13 have already been answered, but we can also touch on different things that the panelists or the audience want to talk about. But this will lead us to the end of the program. So I'll ask first, I'll ask the panelists, did you guys see a question, anyone that you'd want to start with, or did you want me to just start reading off questions? There's one that you particularly wanted to answer.
I think there were a couple questions about writing samples. A lot of students wanted to know how long, what should it be, what would be best to submit. And the advice that I had been given was submit a writing sample that showcases both your research and analytical skills. So I used a brief that allowed for the judge and the clerks to be able to see, here was the problem, here's the cases that I came up with, here's how I applied it to the facts. And also, just another thing, when you do submit a writing sample, make sure you read over it multiple times. There are no typos or anything in it, and know the content of your writing sample, because I have heard some judges, if they know the topic that you wrote on, will want to discuss it with you, or will have a follow-up question for you. My judge did not, but I know that some judges do. And so that's one piece of advice going into the interviews that are related to your writing samples too.
Yeah, and just to jump off Ellen, she's really highlighted the most important points, which are write your own original work product that includes legal analysis. And also a third point I would make is that when we're reviewing writing samples, we prefer ones with less outside editing. So it's much more of your raw writing. So if you do get outside feedback, just note that, because that's helpful for us. And also I think shows integrity then, because you're not trying to pass off something that had other people's feedback. And there's so many ways to, couch that in a way that doesn't look like, oh, this was, torn apart by somebody and not my own. You could just say it reflects certain feedback from my, whoever, but this is my original work product, something like that.
That's great. So I have a question, and I'm going to ask this question first to Gracie and then to Samin. The question is, did you do law review? This is from someone who's a non-traditional student and who's thinking about the time commitment it takes to be on law review, and whether or not it would hurt your chance at a clerkship.
So a lot of judges do put even out there in public on Oscar, or have a private preference for law review, because they know that that gives you a certain set of skills. And I personally did not do law review. I had a job offer before that process began, and I made the choice to not do law review. Once I started really thinking about clerking, I was worried about that. It gave me a lot of anxiety that I was not going to be a competitive candidate. And I certainly dealt with a lot of the imposter syndrome that I know all of us as attorneys, especially diverse attorneys, have. But I felt like I was a much stronger candidate once I had some time in private practice. So my writing sample, for instance, was not a law review note. It was a successful motion for summary judgment that had been edited by a partner, but I included with my writing sample just a little cover that said, this is used with permission. It was public record by that point. It was on a docket, and it had been edited by a partner, but it substantially reflected my own work product. So law review is not the be all end all. It's not going to disqualify you forever from clerking if you don't do it. It can be helpful, especially with certain judges, but I got an opportunity and I did it. So
on the flip side, Samin, you said that law review did play a role in how you viewed whether or not you wanted to clerk. Or you can say whatever you wanted to say.
So I was just going to say that it definitely was a factor that was important to my judge. And I think the answer to a lot of these questions is it just depends, because chambers are so different. So some judges really want law review and they don't care about moot court or mock trial, but some judges like law review or moot court. or some judges don't. It just really varies. But a lot of times, like Gracie said on Oscar, it will say what their preference is. I know that my judge really prefers people to be on law review, and especially on an executive board position, because he knows that that means that you really put in the work to do site checking and spading and all of that. So he just had no question about my ability to do any of those things, because he was just like, well, you learned those things, so that's not something I have to worry about. And it's not something I want to worry about. So he just wants you to have the skill set going into it, because he's not going to teach you, and he won't have to, or she won't have time. So my judge does think it's very important, but again, it'll vary. Oh, and I'll add that you also gain skills doing moot court too, which is why that's also something that's important, because you learn how to write and research and do site checking and things like that, doing moot court as well.
That's great. So my next question is for Nate. Would you recommend you clerk in a jurisdiction where you are most likely to practice following the clerkship? Is there a disadvantage to casting a wide net in your clerkship application or search?
I was literally just answering that question in a loud Q&A, so but I'll answer it out loud. I think someone should apply to any location that they're willing to live in for a year. And I think while it's nice to clerk in a jurisdiction where you are most likely to practice, it's not necessary. So I'm clerking in the Northern District of Ohio, but I'll be practicing in New York. I was able to get a job all the same. I landed a ton of interviews, and I obviously went to school in Atlanta. So I think anywhere that you're able to live for a year is a good place to clerk.
Awesome. My next question is actually a question that was submitted privately. It was about questions about diversity. How does your background and your experiences bring diversity to the bench? And did you find that there is significant representation among your identity markers, either in your courthouse or generally across the United States? First, I'll answer that by saying I forgot to mention that some of the resources that I had quoted earlier will drop in the chat box for you to answer, to provide research on that topic, particularly Perry Cooper's Black Clerks Like Unicorns at Court Without Judges Like Them, which was a 2020 article, and a portrait of Asian Americans in the Law by Harvard Law School's The Practice, but also the article that we had previously talked about, which was the quote that we had shared earlier. But I will ask this question of Rashmi, and you have thoughts about how to showcase your identity, but also to own it either in the application process.
Yeah, so basically right now, unfortunately, there is not a lot of diversity among judges or among clerks. And that's a problem, and that can also make it really scary to apply to clerkships if you are a diverse person. So for me personally, I'm an openly LGBT woman of color. And that was very intimidating when I was applying to clerkships. And it was something that, came up in some of my interviews and occasionally came up in some not super great ways. And it can be discouraging, and it can kind of make you feel bad for your background. But just remember, at the end of the day, when you're applying for a clerkship, the judge you work for, you really are going to be like family. And so hopefully you would want to clerk for someone who was, accepting of you and all of you. And so for me, I went into the clerkship application process being very open about the fact that I was openly LGBT, and obviously, the woman of color, you can't really hide that. But I was very upfront about that, and I figured, if someone has an issue with that, then I don't want them to hire me because it's not going to be a good fit, and I refuse to be in the closet during my entire, 1 or even 2 year clerkship. So acknowledging that it is very scary to be diverse in this space, I encourage all of you to be yourself and to own all of the strength and resilience that your diversity has given you, because there are judges now more increasingly who are recognizing those strengths. And, there definitely is a place for you in the clerkship world, even if it doesn't always seem like it.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that? Because I think it's why we're all here on this panel as well. So I'll open it up to anyone.
Yeah, I'll quickly talk about, yes, I just want to say, you know, I am Korean American and I led with that. I put that in my resume. I made sure to talk about it because that was part of my background in my interview process. And being a clerk, you really see, I think I had read a statistic, and this made me so sad when I was in law school, but basically it was about a profile of Asian Americans in the law. And since they had been tracking federal court statistics, they had done, I think it was like white people were getting basically like 80% of the clerkships, and they tracked it from like 1990 until now. And I think for Asian Americans, it had been like 5% in 1996. And then when they tracked it again in 2016, it was like 6%. It basically had only gone up 1%, even though we know that, right, the Asian population in the United States and even the Asian population within law schools had grown. And I might be misquoting the numbers, but all to say that really just broke my heart. And because in many ways, I think when I'm thinking about my own racial identity, I just know that it's an asset, like so many of these, like Rashmi was saying, and I just know everyone else. I think you want to go into a space bringing all of you. And so the fact that there are so many people who are interested, I would encourage you to go for it. Don't make the fear of getting a no, right? Like sort of cut out the fact that you might get a yes, right? So really, I think there's going to be a lot of no's, but all you need is that one yes.
Any of the other panelists want to chat about this? No? Okay.
I just want to say that I think more judges are recognizing now more than ever, just the same way law firms are, that diverse applicants are so important, and diversity and inclusion in the workspace is so important, not only for the sake of, being a good person or things like that, but it increases the quality of work and increases the quality of your office culture. And it's going to make everything that you do better when you have a variety of backgrounds and of different kinds of people there. So, it can be discouraging. I'm openly LGBTQ, and things have not always, been friendly when I have walked into situations, but the right atmosphere for you, it's going to be an asset. Embrace your full authentic self, bring it to the table, like everyone has said, and, recognize that you're bringing something special that other people don't have. Don't let it make you afraid. It's something to be proud of as an asset.
I think everything that's been said so far and the fact that we're all on this panel and we're all sharing our experiences is extremely, extremely powerful. So I just want to take this opportunity again to thank you all for your time and for agreeing to be on this panel, because I wish when I was applying to clerkships that I could have reached out to all of you, and to be able to even see this panel, I think is extremely moving and powerful. So thank you all. I have a question that was just submitted about being a 1L or a 2L and looking for summer clerkships or externships. How do you go about finding these opportunities? Because I think all of us have externed for a judge or for the U.S. Attorney's Office, some sort of government or judiciary position in our time. And Gracie, you had experience before your current job working for state court. So again, I want to maybe, we haven't heard from Ellen or Nate. So Ellen, if you want to go first, chatting about sort of how you went about finding your externship.
Yeah, so I found my externship through sort of my school's externship office. We had a professor who basically solicited jobs for our school and sent it out to all of the students. So that's one way to go about it. Another thing, I saw somebody responded to a question to someone who posted earlier. You can also go on courts' websites and click on certain judges, and they'll post ways that you can apply to their internship program. So if you have a specific judge in mind or a location that you want to be at, or you're sort of willing to apply anywhere and everywhere to get this judicial internship or externship experience, I would just start searching now, because I know that some chambers will do it where you have to email them or you have to go through a specific process, but it's worthwhile looking up. And then it also kind of saves you on time. If you're planning to apply for them for a clerkship too, you can take their information and also add it to like an Excel sheet for your clerkship application. But through your school or through the court's website, I would say are the best ways to get an internship or externship.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback off what Ellen said. We're living in abnormal times, obviously, and there was a lot of bad that came from it, but there was some good as well. What I've seen law students do this time around during the pandemic was they reach out to judges across the country. They'll get a list from Oscar or the FEC or wherever they could find a list from, or they email judges and see if they're willing to take a virtual extern. Particularly, my judge will have two virtual externs this summer, and neither is from Ohio. So, to the extent that you're interested in an externship and you can't find those resources, at the school or some sort of website, reach out. I think again, the worst that could happen is they'll say no. But I think there are some judges who are more open to taking externs virtually than before. So I think the best resource to find these sort of externships, at least this summer, to the extent that we have a month or so left, is to go down the Oscar list of the same judges who may be hired or may be willing to just take an extern for a semester. And I'll start there. I think that's a good start. And also obviously reach out to former clerks and clerks and piggyback off some of the insight they may have. And you can also probably start with some of the panelists that's on here now. I think they'll probably be able to provide some insight and helpful resources as well.
I'll add to that if you are interested in a particular chambers or who you want to extern for, but you're not sure if they're hiring, you can always call chambers, literally any chambers. You can give them a call. I feel like telephoning people is like a lost art these days, but giving someone a call and being kind and courteous and saying, I'm interested in externing for your summer internship with you, are you guys hiring, is a very, very valuable way of going about this. And I will also say that we haven't really touched on this, but doing a state court internship or a clerkship is also very, very valuable, especially if you want to clerk for a federal court later. That's a great sort of stepping stone to have under your belt, because state courts and local courts do the exact same things that federal courts do. It's just sort of jurisdictionally different. And so it all requires the same sort of skills, writing skills, et cetera. And I definitely did a state court internship first. Sorry, I misspoke. I did a local court externship first, and my judge actually liked my work so much that she called up a federal court and said that they should hire me. So I didn't even, I was like number one on a list of 106 applicants because of that, because of that call. So definitely, state court judges and local judges are your mentors, and those are valuable experiences as well. But we're close to time. It's 7:30, so I just want to say thank you all to everyone in the audience for joining us today. We tried to answer as many questions of yours as we could, but I can speak for myself when I say if you have any more questions that we didn't answer today, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I would be happy to help in whatever way I can. And thank you all to the panelists. Do you have any final comments before we say goodbye, apart from me saying thank you all for your time and for sharing your stories with us?
Yeah, I'll echo Prati that any of you guys feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. And if you have some additional questions or you'd like to speak with me directly, just reach out and I'll set up a time to chat.
I just want to throw out there, I had a lot of questions when I was applying for clerkships because I am also first generation. And so I didn't understand the process. I had a lot of questions. I was initially afraid to ask those questions because I thought, oh my goodness, this is a dumb question. Honestly, applying for clerkships can be really challenging and can be really confusing. So no question is too dumb. Ask your mentors, ask your professors, ask any of us. But I think if you want to go down this path, there are people who are willing to help you. And so don't think that you have to figure out clerkship applications all on your own, because you definitely don't have to.
Great. Great. So I have some closing announcements really quick. Again, thank you to all our panelists for being here for Summer Judicial Series Part 1. And to all the audience members, again, this is only Part 1, and NAPABA and GAPABA will be hosting a Part 2 in May, on May 7th, with federal judges from across the country who will be here to answer your questions as candidly as we try to today. And so if you wanted to know sort of the pipeline to the bench and, you know, apart from clerking, if you want to be a judge someday, that's definitely an event for you. And plus it's just going to be awesome. So you should all try to be there. Registration is live now. So definitely find us at www.gapa.org/events, and we'll post the registration link in the chat box as well. And a quick shout out to our team who's been coordinating everything behind the scenes. From NAPABA, we have Abram Garcia and Maya Romero. Thank you all so much. And from GAPABA, my organization, we have our communications team, which is Claudia Chafloque-Siu and Bonnie Yoon. Thank you all so much for helping us and for helping us coordinate with this. And again, thank you all for coming. We enjoyed this so much. Take care. Have a good one. Oh, also this will be on YouTube. So share it with your friends once it's live, and like us on Facebook and YouTube for more updates. And yeah, find me on LinkedIn. Bye everyone. Thank you.